Start by rolling out a slab using whichever clay you want. I use stoneware. Make sure that the piece that you've got is big enough to lay the pieces on, and then compress the clay using a rib. Lay the pieces flat and cut them out neatly. You can use a ruler, or that's my rolling guide that I use. Cut out the dots where it's marked. Here I'm scoring, but I think you don't need to score, especially if your clay is a little on the drier side. It's probably better to not score. Here I'm just cutting out the little feet. I'm marking the inside of the foot and cutting that out. So one is solid and one has got a bit cut out to make a higher foot. This is the second foot now. So this I'm cutting out the insert twice, and I'm going to cut a third little foot, and that just makes the mug quite a bit higher, and this is completely personal preference. So you can have just one, you can have three, you can have five, it's up to you. This is the handle. Cut that out also using the roller guide. And once you have all the pieces together, this is a scrap piece that I'm using just to test my stamps. If you're rolling with a texture, I would roll that before I cut out the pieces, because that tends to splay the clay out a little bit, and then your measurements will be off. But if you're just using stamps, then it's fine to cut the piece out first and then stamp it. Just taking care not to displace the clay as such. So I've tested this piece, I like it, so I'm just going ahead and putting the stamp on. I use baby powder to dip my stamps in. That way it doesn't stick to the clay. Making sure it's nice and even. And there I've done a few flowers. I also use a little bit of plastic to tidy up the edges. Nice and smooth, and this way you don't get little clay bits coming off on your finger. So we want the rim to be super smooth, because that's where the mouth is going to be making contact with the mug when it's finished. So if you get it nice and smooth at this stage, you don't really have to think about it when the mug is built. And at this stage it's much easier to get that smooth finish without distorting anything. Now I'm doing the feet as well. Really just doing the pieces that will be visible to the eye, which is in fact all of them, really. So now this is a little bit of a tricky part. You want to score all the seams on the one side, and then turn the clay over. This is so that the joins will fit together. They're not kind of being opposed to one another, if that makes sense. So now I'm doing the other side, and it'll be the opposite degree. And then also the darts again on the opposite side. This way they match up really nicely. Just taking care as well not to move the clay so that your shape doesn't go out. Now very carefully putting the mug upside down and turning it, and have your slip or vinegar or water handy, because here's where we're going to join everything up. First thing I'll join is the main seam that's already been scored. The score is sort of like 45 degrees, so they fit together really nicely. Because my clay is quite wet, I'm just using a bit of water, maybe very thin slip. And if you need to score again, score again. Just moistening both edges, and then Again, just taking care not to distort the piece, firmly press that seam together. I like to leave the seam visible, but that's also a personal choice. You can integrate it by using a serrated rib and make it really neat. Also take care if you have put a pattern on there not to touch the pattern too much, because that will kind of make it disappear. Just cleaning up the inside seam and making sure that the mug is round and the seam is nicely tightly fitted. So this part here, so now you've got scored side on opposite edges of each dart, and they will just fit nicely together. So here I am just making the slip a little bit more clayey. And you see they just, the part that's got the scoring towards the inside goes over the one that's got the scoring towards the inside. And here I'm just actually scoring a little bit more. Maybe I was in a bit of a hurry, so just doing that again and put the water on. So you see this, I don't know if you can see here, is where I kind of scored the seams. They're creating a bit of a crack, so that's why I say, unless your clay is really super wet, maybe don't do that. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, depends the pattern I'm making. So if I want the pattern to be specifically laid out, I will put the score marks in, then I know where the folds are going to be. But in this case it kind of backfired because it does cause a little bit of cracking just where that dart meets the clay, and then that requires extra tidying up. And then I'm just going around smushing, making sure that they're all very well connected, making sure that they're strong. And I'll go and do the inside of that as well in a minute. There is a lot of fettling going on here, and I think if you do that at this point, you'll end up with a good mug. It's not worth rushing this stage. So here I am scoring, and you'll see that the clay is actually at a little bit of an angle when you've got it, and I score it so that it's flat, and then the foot sits on it really neatly, and that way you get a good score as well, just scoring the little foot. And scoring again, we don't want the foot falling off. Just making sure that it is very smooth. And just tapping it to make sure that it is on properly. Yeah, I tend to tidy up as I go along. Saves a bit in the long run. I am a bit of a faffer, so you might not need to do all of this. I fiddle and faff a lot. Now this is my little seam tool, so it makes tiny little dots along the seam. I just like it. Makes it look like a fabric seam. Just one of my little things that I enjoy doing. So now I never throw away the scrap until I'm completely finished with the piece. So these I am going to use as coils to reinforce inside. And I'll do all the fixing on the inside before I put the little hollow legs on. Because once you've got those on, you want to not be resting it on them quite so much, because then they tend to get a little bit flatter. So I'm just cutting out to strengthen the dots on the inside here. Just coiling them slightly. This is optional, I guess. You could just use a nice thick slip to strengthen those seams. I like to use a coil, although it does take quite a bit more effort. I hope you can see, not very good, it's a little bit dark, but yeah, so I'm basically just putting the coils on the dart seams and on the bottom as well, so where the foot joins. And then once I've tidied up inside and I've reinforced those seams, I will then, the last thing I'll do is put these little feet on before the handle, obviously. Score, put a bit of slip. You can see my slip is really thin, and it's because I've got a wetter clay and wait too long after cutting out before I started assembly. And that's a scoring rib, by the way, not a flat rib, just in case you're wondering why I'm putting the rib on. It's got serrated little teeth. If you don't have one of those, you can use a fork, you can use a needle tool, really anything. Check that it is nice and level, and if it's not, you can just squish the cup down a little bit so that it is level. And then it's time for the handle. So again, tidying up before it's assembled just makes it that much easier, because once it's on, you don't really want to be fiddling with it too much. So nice and smooth now. Keep in mind that this is going to be held in the hand, so you don't want any sharp bits on it at all. I put the handle on the seam. That's just because that's a nice strong point. The clay is thicker there because I've created it as double. And as I said before, I don't hide the seam. I like it to be a feature. But that is completely up to you. Scoring where I've marked for the handle, top and bottom. And also considering how the hand fits in, that's the kind of shape that you want. So I'll be playing around with that a little bit. Also, the other thing to remember is to not put the handle above the rim of the cup, because that causes problems when you're washing and drying. It just creates a weak spot. So the handle should be at a comfortable place, for you to drink with, and from a practical point of view, you don't want it sticking up and then it's easily knocked and broken. So just squeezing it on nicely. Remember to support the inside of the mug when you're squeezing, so that you don't distort the actual form. And just tidying up. And then I faff a lot again, but that is pretty much your mug done. And then it'll be ready to dry and fire and glaze. And there you go. Enjoy. I hope you found this useful.